Hey, friend, welcome back to a new episode of the Leading Yourself podcast. Last week, I was very vulnerable and share some of the things that I'm focusing on this year, some of the shifts that I'm making this year. And I share that one of the things that I want to do is to um, make myself a priority. And today I want to dig a little bit deeper into that from the perspective of self care. Because at the end of the day, in my eyes, self care is a way of making yourself a priority. So, in today's podcast episode, we're going to be talking about what self care really means and how can you use self care to make yourself a priority in 2022. Let's dig into today's podcast episode. Welcome to the Leading Yourself podcast. This is your host, Carolina de Arriba. I'm an HR professional, health and fitness coach, wife, mom, and above all things, a goal getter. In this podcast, we're going to be digging into all things leadership, professional and career development, habits, and relationships. This is a podcast for those who want to become the best version of themselves. Those who have big dreams and are willing to embrace the journey and put in the work to achieve them. My goal is to share with you the tools, tips, and tricks to help you in your journey. So let's dig into today's episode. Let's talk about self-care. Last week, I mentioned I did an episode, one of my most personal and vulnerable episode since I started the podcast, where I shared a lot of the things that are in my heart, in my mind, and the shifts that I'm very intentionally making in 2022. And I share that one of those shifts, and in this case, what's something that I want to intensify to what I have been doing so far is making myself a priority. And when I think about making myself a priority, I immediately think about self care. And I know self care um, has a reputation, for a lack of a better word, of being an indulgence. When we talk about self care, or if you look for self care in Pinterest, ideas for self care, immediately things like taking a bubble bath and going for a massage or getting a pedicure come up, right? Some more deeper blogs may talk about things like meditation or journaling or things like that. And I think all those are great ways of self care. I don't want to criticize any of those things. Um, but I believe that self care is much more than that. And that's what I want to unbundle in today's podcast episode. I also have heard many times self care Sundays. I'm sure that you have heard that. I've been guilty of that, of scheduling self care on Sundays. And I think there's nothing wrong with being intentional about making time for yourself and focusing on self care on Sundays. But personally, I believe that if you embrace true self care, that is something that happens every day. And I'm not suggesting that you take a bubble bath every day or you go to the spa every day or anything like that. I want to go much deeper today in this topic of self care and probably share with you a different definition and a different perspective on self care and how self care is really the way for you to make yourself a priority in 2022. So let's dig into this topic of self care. And I want to start by saying that self care is not an indulgence, it's a necessity. We must make self care um, part of our daily routines. Self care should be a must for everyone, right? It's not something that we should do, it's not something that we should do more of, it's something that we must do and we must do every day. Because self care at the end of the day is taking care of ourselves. It's that simple, right? Self care, taking care of one's self. So, I love a definition of self care that Flowers shares. Stacey Flowers was on the podcast some time ago. I had an amazing conversation with her. If you are not familiar with her work, she has an amazing tech talk out there. She is a motivational speaker. She specializes in happiness and she's amazing. If you missed that podcast episode, really recommend you go back and listen to it because it was really, really good. What I will do is I will put a link to that podcast episode on the show notes in case you're interested and you want to listen to it. We talk about a lot of things on that conversation. Anyway, she has a definition of self care, and she says self care is about knowing yourself, liking yourself, loving yourself, and respecting yourself. And I love that because I can't agree more with her perspective on self care. And she intentionally talks about knowing, liking, loving, and respecting yourself, meaning it's a verb, is an action. Self care is an action, right? It's not something that happens once a week or once a month, but it's an action that we need to be very intentional about. So let's unbundle these components, and I'm going to unbundle them from my own personal perspective and how I define self care and how I go about self care or how I'm planning to go about self care in 2022. So, the first piece of self care is knowing yourself. And I think this is critical to move away from the stereotypes that we see and we hear about every day around self care. When I was a little bit ironic talking about self care, when we search the word self care, we come up with things like bubble baths and massage and pedicures and all these things. For some people, that is a great way of self care. For others, it's not. For me personally, those things, while once in a while I enjoy them, it's not something that, I'm thrilled about. I will do many other things before I, go to a spa or take a bubble bath. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's not my way of self care. Why? Because my values, my passions, the things that energize me are different. We are all different individuals. We're all so different from each other. And self care should look different for each of us. So I think self care should start with knowing yourself. And knowing yourself is an ongoing action of knowing yourself, right? And the best way I can think about starting knowing yourself in this context of self care and making yourself a priority is start with your values. A couple of episodes ago, I talk about living a fulfilling life in 2022, and I talk all about fulfillment. And I talk about values and how to go about connecting with and uncovering what are your values. And I think if you listen to that podcast episode and you did the exercise that I explained on that podcast episode, that is going to be very handy when it comes to self care as well, because you should define self care and look on ways to take care of yourself that is aligned with your values. That is the key for an effective and powerful self care. One that is aligned with your values. If you value health, then self care can look like eating healthy, like taking your vitamins, like exercising, like eating a lots of veggies and fruits and drinking water, and all those things are going to be very important parts of your self care. If you value adventure, for example, maybe going scuba diving is the best way for you to take care of yourself and focus on self care. So, depending on what you value most, is how you're going to come up with the most powerful ways to focus on self care for yourself in a way that is unique to you. And then not only values, but passions. What are you passionate about? What are the things that bring you energy and joy? What are the things that energize you? What are the things that make you feel alive? Which are very different for each of us, right? The things that fulfill me, the things that bring me joy, the things that make me feel alive might be very different from the things that fulfill you and bring you joy and make you feel alive. So, doing self reflection and really getting to know yourself in a deeper level, I think, is the first and most important piece around self care, because then you can take care of yourself based on something that is going to be impactful, that is going to be speaking your semi language, that is going to be aligned with what you value most in your life. So, spending time getting to know yourself is the foundation for self care and the foundation to make yourself a priority. A great way to start getting to know yourself at a deeper level, because a lot of times we believe we know ourselves. I think most everyone will say, "Oh, I know myself," right? I've been living with myself since the minute I was born. But a lot of times we never go deep to really get to know ourselves. So, journaling is a great way to start knowing yourself. Doing the value exercise that I shared a couple of episodes ago can be a great place to start to get to know yourself. But I didn't say know yourself. I say knowing yourself, which means is an ongoing journey. We change, we evolve. We're constantly need to be discovering ourselves and unbundling the things that drive us, which can change over time based on a million things, right? So constantly making sure that you're getting to know yourself. The next thing is liking yourself. And this is all about self acceptance, self awareness, and self compassion. There are things I'm sure that you like about yourself, but I also sure that there are things that you don't like about yourself. We're all the same way, right? I personally, there are things about myself that I really, really like, but there are things about myself that I don't like at all. And the thing is, in average, the question is, do you like yourself or do you find yourself not liking yourself? And a way to answer that question is to pay attention to the conversations that you're having in your head, those conversations you're having with yourself. What is the tone of those conversations? When you go on the mirror in the morning, when you speak to yourself, to your reflection in the mirror, yes, it's totally normal. Yes, we all do it. What do you tell yourself? Do you typically focus on the things that you don't like about yourself? Do you criticize yourself? Or do you like what you see when you look yourself at the mirror? And when I say you like what you see, I'm not only talking about your body and your physical appearance, but the whole you. It is important that we learn to accept the whole you, the whole us, that we embrace ourselves. And I want to share with you some ways that you can learn to like yourself. Because let's be realistic, you are the most important person in your life. You are the person that you are spending and will ever spend most time with. You have been with yourself since the minute you were born, and you will be with yourself until you're no longer here, right? So we need to learn to accept ourselves. Liking yourself is about self acceptance, is about self awareness, right? It's the next step after getting to know yourself is liking yourself. And of course, there's going to be aspects about yourself that you don't necessarily like, that you want to change. And that's okay. That's part of our evolution, that's part of our growth. But in general, do you like yourself? That is the key question. So, I want to share some ways that you can start learning to like yourself. So, the first one is it's important that you take the time to celebrate your wins, that you take the time to focus on your accomplishments. See? It is important that you look at the good things that you're doing, that you celebrate your wins, that you celebrate the things that you have accomplished. That's why I really like um every week to do some self-reflection, and one of the questions that I always ask myself is what did I accomplish this week? What went well this week? In what situations did I showed up and I'm proud of how I showed up, right? So start asking yourself those types of questions. I think, liking yourself starts with asking yourself the right questions. When you look yourself at the mirror, what questions are you asking yourself? Are you asking, why did you screw X or Y? Why did you fail to do whatever? Or are you asking yourself, what am I proud of? What did I accomplish? So change the questions you're asking yourself and connect every week and look for what are the things that you're most proud about yourself and what are the things that you accomplish that week. The second is reframe your failures. Many people that have low self esteem, that they don't generally like themselves, they tend to focus on their failures, on the fact that they're not succeeding in life. They believe that their poor performance at work or at school is a reflection of their character. And, sometimes when we do something wrong, when we make a mistake, instead of focusing on the mistake, we're focusing on us. And we're telling ourselves the stories in our head that we are a mistake. So I think it is important to reframe our failures, to look at our quote unquote failures as learning opportunities. Focus on the situation, focus on the thing, not on you and thinking that you are a failure, right? You might made a mistake and we need to accept our mistakes and we need to learn from our mistakes, but never think that you are a mistake or you are a failure. Another way to start to learn to like yourself is to learn to accept compliments. People that have low self esteem, people that typically don't like themselves, when they receive compliments, typically they make excuses for those compliments and almost like denying the compliments. It's sometimes can be difficult to learn how to accept compliments, but I think it's a key part of building your self esteem and starting to like yourself. Receiving compliments can boost your mood, can improve your self image, strengthen your relationships. So I think when someone gives you a compliment, next time that you receive a compliment, try not to deny it, try not to reject it. Instead, take a minute to let it sink. Thank whoever gave you the compliment, have some kind word for that person, and then reflect on that compliment, right? And try to find evidence that supports that compliment. That is going to help you build your self-esteem and start to like yourself even more. The other thing is you need to stop comparing yourself with others. I think that is one of the reasons why we don't like ourselves sometimes, because we compare ourselves with other people and we compare our failures with other people's successes. And the only thing that we see in those individuals are their successes. And the only thing that we see in ourselves is our failures. But we all have successes and we all have failures. We all are human beings. And I think we need to stop making that unfair comparison with other people. Other thing you can do to start liking yourself, to learn to like yourself, is to practice patience with yourself. There might be things about yourself that you want to change. We all have things about ourselves that we want to change. That is completely normal. That's part of life. That's part of being human. And you can change a lot of things about yourself. You can change your physical appearance. You can change how you show up. You can change your skills and develop new skills, right? But you need to be patient. A lot of times we set unrealistic goals for parts of us that we want to change. And we set basically impossible goals to ourselves. It is important that if you want to change a part of you, that you set realistic targets, that you identify milestones, and that you're patient and compassionate with yourself. Here's the thing. You can like yourself as you are right now and still be working on becoming a better version of yourself. One is not exclusive of the other. There's always going to be areas of yourself that you want to improve, and that is a good thing. But that doesn't mean that you should not like yourself because you're not yet that version of yourself that you aspire to be. You can have both. You can like yourself as you are right now and still continue to work on improving yourself or improving areas of your life. Another way to learn to like yourself is to go easy on your past. Your past doesn't determine who you are, and certainly doesn't determine who you can become. Sometimes we might not like ourselves because of past actions or past behaviors, and it's important that we learn how to forgive ourselves. The fact that you feel bad or you feel guilty about something that you did in the past, I personally believe is actually a good thing because that means that you have evolved. That means that your values have evolved. And the only reason why you feel bad, where you feel guilty, is because you find a disconnection between the way you show up, the way you behave, the way you act, and your values. And that means that you are being self aware. And that means that you want to be better. So I think it is a good thing. But in the midst of that, we need to learn to forgive ourselves. Acknowledge that you feeling that way doesn't determine how you're going to show up today or tomorrow. You're completely in control on how you change your behaviors. It is important to acknowledge that your past doesn't determine your future. And that if you feel that way, if you feel bad, if you feel guilty for whatever reason, that means that you have grown, that you're self aware, and that you have values. Hey, I'm going to quickly interrupt today's podcast episode to give you an update on the 6 a.m. Club. If you haven't heard about the 6 a.m. Club, this is the new project that I've started in 2022. I have talked a lot about my morning routine, and one of the elements that I've been very intentional to include in my morning routine is inspiration. And I wanted to share that with everyone. So every day, I'm releasing a 3 to 5 minute podcast episode with a daily dose of inspiration. This is ideal to listen in the morning when you're having your cup of coffee, getting ready for work, or on your commute. And I guarantee that you're going to start your day inspired. I know that the subscription is not available in every country, so I decided that every Friday, I'm going to share with everyone here in the Leading Yourself podcast that day's episode of the 6 a.m. Club. So every Friday, tune in for a new episode of the 6 a.m. Club. If you want to learn more about the 6 a.m. Club, if you want to subscribe, which, what the way, a monthly subscription costs less than a cup of your favorite coffee. But if you want to learn more about the 6 a.m. Club, go to the show notes on this podcast episode and make sure that you subscribe. I will see you here on Friday for that daily dose of morning inspiration. And now let's get back to today's podcast episode. Okay, one last way that you can learn to like yourself. I'm sure there's many other ways, but this is the last one I'm going to share for today is like, quote unquote, most of you. You know, a healthy self-esteem is important for your overall well-being. And I think accepting that is the very important first step. Life is too short to spend it being uncomfortable in your own skin. And when I say uncomfortable in your own skin, I'm not only talking about your body and the way you look, but in your personality, in your being, right? So if you find yourself constantly being uncomfortable in your own skin, meaning being uncomfortable with who you are and how you show up and what you do, therapy might be an option. And I never talk about therapy here, but I know a lot of friends that have found a lot of value in therapy to improve self esteem. So if you're someone that struggles with self-esteem, is something that I think everyone should consider. But liking yourself. So what does it mean in the context of self-care? I think a way of self-care is to learn to accept yourself, to learn to like yourself, your whole self. We talk a ton about showing up as our whole selves, right? That was another thing that it was part of the shifts that I want to make in 2022. I want to show as my whole authentic self. And that means that I am going to show up with my strengths, but also with my weaknesses, with my successes, but also with my failures, with the parts about me that I like, but also with the parts of me that I don't like. You can't show as your whole authentic self if you don't learn to accept yourself, if you don't learn to like your whole self. And that's why when we talk about self care, getting to that point where you like yourself, when you like most of yourself, and you accept yourself as you are, is a great way of making yourself a priority and a great way of self care. The next level of self care is loving yourself. And you might know yourself, you might like yourself, but you might not love yourself, right? I think there is a difference between liking yourself and loving yourself. Let me ask you a question. If you are in a relationship or you have ever been in a relationship and you've been totally in love, you're in this honeymoon phase of your relationship, and I ask you to make a list of the things that you do or you would do for that person that you absolutely love. Your partner, your kids, whoever that is. Make a list of all the things that you do for someone that you love. And I am pretty confident I would make a bet that if you go through that list and I ask you, do you do any of those things for yourself? My guesses are that you're not. Or maybe not in the same way or in the same intensity that you do for others. And I think that um, having high regards for your own well being and happiness, that is what self love is for me. It means taking care of your own needs and not sacrificing your well being to please others. It's about not settling, right, for less than what you deserve. I think self love is a state of appreciation for oneself. I think self love can mean different things for each person because we all have different ways to take care of ourselves and to love ourselves. That's why I started this conversation with you need to know yourself. And you need to continuously work in your self awareness and in getting to know yourself deeper. But I think self love can look in the way of talking about yourself with love, for example. I mentioned before when you look yourself at the mirror, when you talk to yourself in that reflection, and yes, we all do it. What is the tone of your voice? What are you telling yourself? Are you talking to yourself with love, with compassion? Loving yourself means you make yourself a priority. Loving yourself means that you give yourself a break from self judgment. I think love and judgment cannot coexist together. Think about that person that I asked you to think about a minute ago, that person that you love, you you very much love, right? Think about that person. If that person were to do something that is against your values, if that person were to do something that is quote unquote wrong, would you judge that person? My bets are you would not judge that person. Yeah, you might tell that person that you didn't like this or that, but you continue to love that person. If you truly love that person, that is not going to break that love. And I'm sure that you're going to try to justify why that person did what they did. How many times someone that you love does something that seems wrong and you find yourself justifying that person? Oh, he or she might have had a bad day. That's not how she or she usually is, right? And we make excuses and for that person to behave in a certain way, but we don't judge them because we love them. So, loving yourself is giving yourself a break from self judgment. I think we tend to be our worst critics. We tend to constantly judge ourselves. And giving ourselves a break from that is a way of loving ourselves. Trusting yourself. Do you trust your gut instinct? That was, by the way, another thing on my list of shifts for 2022. Trusting more on my gut instinct. You know, you are the CEO of your life. You are the CEO of your life. If you were to have to hire a CEO for your life, will you trust on yourself to be the CEO of your life? I bet for many people the answer is no. But you still are the CEO of your life. So trusting yourself is part of loving yourself. Another way is being true to yourself. How many times we tell ourselves stories to justify things and not be true to ourselves. Loving yourself is being nice to yourself, is setting healthy boundaries, is forgiving yourself when you're not being true or you're not being nice to yourself, is listening to your body, is taking breaks from work. It's putting the phone down and connect to yourself or with others or do something creative. It's eating healthy, is indulging sometimes. You know, I asked yourself, what do you do for someone that you love? And if you are a parent, right, starts with taking care of our kids. I asked this question on a podcast episode I was talking last year. I'm like, if you are a parent, let me ask you this. How many times you have not given your kids food at lunch or dinner or breakfast? How many times your kids have skipped meals because you didn't have time to prepare the meals? I would say never. Yeah, sometimes you might have just done mac and cheese on the microwave, right? Or a sandwich or something quick, but they all always have eat, I'm sure. Yet we say we don't have time for certain things, right? So, do you have time for yourself? Are you taking care of yourself, of your basic needs? Are you taking care of your health? Are you moving your body? Are you eating healthy? All those are ways of loving yourself. So, loving yourself is for me the ultimate level of making yourself a priority, is the ultimate level of self care. When you get to the point that you love yourself, that you do things for yourself like you would do for the people that you love. Many times we prioritize others before we prioritize ourselves. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with prioritizing other people in your life. And I will be talking about relationships soon on the podcast because that's another area that I'm focusing on in 2022. What I'm saying is, you need to make yourself a priority. You need to learn to like and love yourself and treat yourself as you would treat someone that you love. And sometimes that means buying yourself something, indulging in something. You know, maybe it is going to the spa or getting a massage, or maybe for you that looks different, right? For me, one of my values is personal growth. So anytime that I come and record a podcast episode, for me is a way of self-care. Other people might see it as work. For me is a way of filling my cup, is a way of feeling energized. So, as we wrap up today's podcast episode, I want to ask you a few questions that I would love for you to reflect on if you think that self care is something that you want to focus on this year, if making yourself a priority is something that you want to focus on this year. Do you know yourself? Do you think that you are self aware, that you know your strengths, but also you know your weaknesses? You know the things that energize you and the things that deplete your energy. What are those things? What are those things that you value most? What are your priorities? What are the activities, the things that when you do them, they energize you? And what are the things that when you do them, it depletes your energy? So do more of the things that energize you. And that is a way of self care. Another question: do you like yourself? And as we said, you don't have to like every aspect about yourself. But do you generally like yourself? Do you accept yourself, your whole self as you are? We talk about, I mentioned before, a lot about showing up as our whole authentic self. But do you like that whole authentic self of yours? And then do you love yourself? Do you do for yourself the things that you would do for those that you love? The same way that you do things to express love to others, what are the things that you can do to express love for yourself? So that's what I have for you today. My intention with today's podcast episode was to invite you to reflect about these things. And if you truly want to make yourself a priority in 2022, it starts with this self reflection, with knowing yourself. And self care is going to look different for each of us. But anything that you do to know yourself, like yourself, and love yourself is a way of taking care of yourself, is a way of making yourself a priority. And I hope that you are ready and looking forward to make yourself a priority this year. If you like today's podcast episode, I'm going to ask you please share it with a friend, anyone that you think can benefit from today's content. And with that, I hope you have an amazing week ahead, and I will see you here again next week for another episode of the Leading Yourself podcast.